Thank you, Eli. We're going to begin. We're going to introduce our team with you. Many of you already know them, but of course, it's good, I think, to introduce ourselves again so that you can see who we are. Pablo, could we please share our screen? Thank you very much. That's excellent. Thank you very much, Pablo. As many of you may know, we have within our Niagara College Toronto, in our team, the director for LATAM of NCT and UCW, who is Lawrence Ragos. We also have wonderful Gabriela de la O, who is our regional director for NCT in Latin America. Many of you may already know Elizabeth Romero. Eli is our business development. She comes from Venezuela. You can also see Marilia Simoes, who is our business development for Brazil. You can see Carolina Arevalo, who is our manager for Colombia. And Alejandra Merillo, whom I wanted to highlight from Ale, because she is the international marketing manager. So congratulations, Ale, for this. And myself, you know me, I am Rosana Valerio, business development for the Caribbean, Peru, and other regions. Next. You can see also where we are located. If you or we can carry out an event together, if you would like an event, we can. You can request one. Gabby is for Mexico, Elizabeth for onshore Canada, Marilia for Brazil, and Caro for Colombia. And I am there for Peru and the Caribbean. Very well. And here, I wanted to take the opportunity to let you know that, as you may remember, from last Friday, we can send applications in for these 3 new programs, the 3 new undergraduate diplomas that are already receiving applications. Our business with focus on accounting, business focused on sales and marketing, and also our program of programming. Remember that these are very highly demanded and very popular programs in the Toronto area. And you have to reach out for us to be able to help you in any of these events with students or consulting sessions. We must highlight here that if you have students for the intake in May, we must consider our deadline, our upcoming deadline, which is April 1st. So we have to say that all of the visa applications for students that are starting in May, the deadline is April 1st. Right now, I would like to give the floor to Gabby, who has a few important words about this session. Gabby, go ahead, please. Hello, and thank you very much for participating. We are thrilled to continue our seeing you lesson after lesson and supporting you in this important part of learning through these master classes. And I would like to thank you today for joining us in changing the world, in learning to provide a better education and promote education. As we know today, the situation around the world is complicated, and we wanted to ask a few seconds of silence for all of our colleagues who are in difficult situations in an area of conflict, for all of those people who are undergoing difficult situations. And let's hope that with all of the work that we carry out through education to be able to help in as much as possible to make this place, the world, a better place, and that everyone from their own scope of action can contribute for others to continue working to make this a better world through education and peace. And Niagara College, Toronto, and Global University Systems are committed precisely with the uniting nations, uniting people, regardless of nationality, regardless of background. And there is no better way of changing the world than through education. There is a very famous phrase that says that education does not change the world, but it does change the people who will change the world. So let's continue doing our work, and let's take 10 seconds to think about this and as a signal of support to all of these people. Thank you very much. We can continue with our masterclass. I hope that you can obtain important knowledge, and I'm sure that Pablo is going to impart it, and I will be taking notes of this information. Thank you. Thank you very much, Gabby. Very well. First of all, I would like to introduce our speaker today. Today, we have here the Director for Commercial Development for Latin and North America of Advisor, who is Pablo Quintero. Pablo is sharing his sales experience with us today, but also focused on recruiting our students. With today's masterclass, we would like to identify the students' needs that a lot of the time are hard to identify, and what technicals or ways can we use to be able to identify their needs and then to offer the best possible advice. Pablo, welcome. Welcome to our fifth masterclass. How are you, Pablo? I am very well. Thank you very much. Thank you for allowing me to be here to join you. I see many names that I know in the chat from what I could see, and many others that I still haven't met. And I hope that everything that we discussed today is useful to all of the partners. And I would also like to join Gabby in her observations and to say that it's important to realize how lucky we are to be living in areas where we are not undergoing conflicts such as the conflicts that are taking place elsewhere in the world. And also, I would like to tell you a little bit about myself. Who am I? What do I do? So that you can understand why I'm here and how I can share my experience for you to take it on as you wish. Advice, suggestions. I'm just simply here to share the knowledge I have accrued in these years. So to begin, it is important to know that I worked for agencies at the beginning, very large agencies, and some rather small ones that later grew. And why do I mention this? Because the way that we advise our students tends to be different depending on what type of company we are, what type of business we are. So there is no final solution recipe that applies to all, but just I'm here to provide different perspectives. And I would like to invite all of you to share your perspectives at the end of the masterclass to see different examples and ways of working towards fulfilling the needs of the students so that we can all enrich ourselves from each other's experiences. I've also been working with schools. Many of the people I have seen in the chat have worked with me in schools. And that helped me understand the perspective of a school, the kind of thing that I must keep in mind as an advisor to be able to provide sound advice to the client, especially to help them identify their needs. And finally, as I was saying, this is not one recipe that fits all, one solution fits all. This is my experience as an agent, the things that I have found useful, and you can take it as a starting point, and you're going to see different examples throughout the presentation that you can adapt to your own business. After the presentation, we're going to have a Q&A session. You will be able to ask anything you wish. And if there is anything that you can ask or you think is pertinent to us during the presentation, please do so. I would like to thank ACT for this opportunity. It has really been amazing, all the organization of this masterclass, and I hope that you enjoy this. So we may begin. I believe we may. Perfect. So currently, everything that I work with on my daily life has to be with a sales perspective, advising agencies, schools, etc. But I never lose sight of what I like best, which I think it was advising students, that adrenaline that you get when somebody comes to your agency, or maybe today through a video call or any other means, and to know that we have the chance of changing lives, of offering experiences that will really mark a point of inflection in the lives of others. As a basic rule in an agency, I always had 6 questions that I would always ask. Then we're going to look at 6 complementary questions that you may use or not, or change the order depending whether you think they're too basic or not. But these 6 questions that you can see on the screen were fundamental to provide sound advice and understand what the client is wanting to achieve. Because a lot of the time when we're trying to offer a program, we offer what we have available. And that doesn't necessarily match the needs or objectives of the client or of the student. So along these lines, it is extremely important to understand that by understanding deeply the basic and objective needs and objectives of each student, it is very important. But don't think about just looking at the tree, but the whole forest. Because if we provide sound advice, this is going to bring about more clients. Yes, so sales will help us first, but then it is the post-sales process that is going to help us evolve. So let's look at these questions very quickly. Afterwards, we're going to see the different questions with a strategy. So the first question I ask, where would you like to go? What is your preferred destination? Then, how long for? There are many ways of asking this question. We'll see this later. Also, when would you like to start? And if you have a date, a specific date in mind, the issue of languages, whether you have a considerable level of a foreign language or not, then the type of education that you're looking for, what type of course or program, what is the background of that person to be able to understand what to target. And finally, the objectives. What do you want to achieve with this experience? How did you get to us? Why? What do you want to achieve? Now we're going to analyze this one by one. And I understand that a lot of the time in this first stage, we see, yes, these are questions that we normally ask, but now we're going to see them in greater detail to understand why we're asking these questions, because a lot of the time we don't even know why we ask the questions. Let's go with number 1, the location. Where do you want to travel to study? What is your preferred destination and why? We should always try to ask positive questions with a spin of adrenaline, traveling, of aims. The moment we say, but wouldn't you want to go somewhere else, or the no, or the comma, maybe this really transmits negativity to the client. So it is very good to get the client on board with a positive spin, with a smile, with enthusiasm. All of us who work in this sector love what we do, because otherwise we wouldn't be able to do it. Very well. So we're talking about the location specifically. Now I relate this with the question where. At the end, you'll see that every question has to do with where, why, when. So this is the where. Why do we start asking about locations? Because we need to know if the destinations that interest the client are available in my agency. If, for example, I am promoting studies in Canada and the client comes and says that they want to go to Burkina Faso, obviously we won't be able to offer anything. But this takes me to a second point, which is I could offer an available destination from a colleague. And I want to be very clear. I think one of the things, of the reasons why this industry has been able to overcome all of the storms that it has had to sail through, especially because we have been very affected with the recent events, and the agencies know it because they have been battling daily. So what's important is that we are an incredible industry. We want the sun to shine for everyone. We want everyone to progress, to evolve, to grow. And all of the networking events are really very good. From every event, from every visit, I take something with me. At the moment, I am no longer traveling, but before, when I was traveling, I was making friends. I was networking, making contacts. I can see friends in the chat whom I know from before. So this is what I want to say. Do not lose the opportunity of changing a student's life or a person's life just because we do not have an available destination. This sometimes leads us to understand that we have to broaden the spectrum of the program or get better training on a specific program, or maybe sending this lead or this prospective client to another colleague. Now, post-COVID, we have realized something that we didn't before, and which is the importance of having open borders, knowing if this destination is open. For example, NCT is open to students. Canada is increasingly flexible, but we need to identify the location or the travel destination that the client would like. And we have to say, okay, is this open? Is it not open? Do we have it? Do we not have it, etc. Now, we have to look at the location. We may be able to combine different destinations. Maybe the client wants to go to several places, and we have to see that the courses that the client is interested in, we have to see that these courses are available in the destination that this client wants. Otherwise, there's no point in offering a specific destination if we know that the course is not available there. Now, after matching the destination with the objectives of the client, which is extremely important, I think the most important thing is that we have to listen to the client, take note of everything, but also take note of the things that we know, for example, are unattainable, that are impossible. For example, to study English and work in certain destinations is not possible. So if the student says that they want to go to a specific location, but they want to work and study, and they cannot do it there, then this is something that we have to tell them immediately. And remember that everything we're doing at the level of questions and consultations of the client starts from a general, broader perspective to a more specific perspective. This is like a bottleneck so that we can fine-tune the destination to what's ideal for that person. Another important thing that I always took into consideration because I started working with juniors, this is with children, with minors, and then with people who were over 18, adults. So a lot of the time when I was asking questions about destinations, the parents would ask many questions that had to do with the welfare of the student. For example, I remember once I was sending a location in southern England, which was small, and the parents always asked me, but wouldn't it be better to take him to London or to New York to be experiencing these destinations? And what will come from this question is, okay, how many times has your child traveled? Oh, well, this is the first time. In my experience, never assuming that they will accept it, they will like it, but in my experience, for the first time abroad, it is important that the client goes to a more secluded, tranquil, I don't mean small so much as in population, because it could be bigger, but a friendlier location, maybe Toronto or Vancouver. They are extremely friendly for a first experience because of security and many other reasons. But let's take into consideration that if mom or dad come and say, I would like my child to be safe in a cosmopolitan city, we have to try to land it to the most suitable location for the specific client. We must consider that not always by going to a specific destination they will have a good experience. And the clients, mom and dad, will value very much your knowledge on those destinations and what is being offered in terms of security, options for fun, etc. Now, the second question, and I'm going to try to move faster because otherwise we're going to go above time. Now, when we're talking about the length of stay, we can ask, okay, how long do you want to study for? What time have you got available? How much time have you got available? Because sometimes they say, I only have 6 months, or I want to go away for 2 years, etc. And here we start asking a series of factors that allows us to find the best program for this client. Remember, and I am going to repeat this throughout the presentation, remember, all of the questions are linked to each other. None is asked in isolation. They all lead us to the fine-tuned bottleneck. We cannot just select a course based on one question. So duration has to do with how long. Sometimes students come and say, I would like to go and study English for 2 years. I don't know if there are institutions that do it or not. Let's say they say 4 years of English. We can say that in 4 years, they are going to be really bilingual and that it may be far too much. So we would recommend 6 months of a pathway, maybe entering another program, etc. So once we know the duration, we can start focusing on what the client wants and identifying what we would like to offer the client because we know the length or duration of the program. Very well. This comes hand in hand with the second point, which is to select the suitable program according to the duration. So for example, if the student said that he was interested or she was interested in sales and marketing, we can see the NCT length of program agrees with what the student is looking for. Now, the importance of cost for duration. This is really an eye-opener. It gives them the idea of how much the cost will be, and also it gives us the idea of whether the client has any inkling of costs, because a lot of the time we get the clients, mom, dad, and they say, I want my child to go abroad for 2 years. And we ask, do you have an idea of cost? Sometimes they say no, sometimes they say yes. And sometimes the costs that they have are unrealistic. They can say it may cost $500, $2,000. And so when we talk about duration, I try to explain, for example, this is the cost of a 2-week holiday, all-inclusive holiday to Disney or elsewhere, whatever. But I try to land them, to ground them, to say, this is how much is spent during holidays, and this is how much is invested in education for 4 weeks, 6 weeks, etc., which may be very expensive or seem very expensive, or or for a year or 6 months. And this helps us see if the client has the means, if he is truly a potential client. So here again, this is the same thing as in the beginning. Agreement with the length of the course and the objectives of the client. This is very important. And why do I say this? Because the client may be wanting a specific course, but the length of the course is not suitable. They can say, I want to study business focused on accounting, but I only have 3 weeks. Perfect, great. But we do not have that kind of program. Or for you to have training in business, you're going to need so much time. So all of these things take us to the key point, which is where we basically have to hit the nail on the head with the client and his or her desires. Then when do you think you'll begin? Do you have a date in your head? When would you like to travel? So this is related to when. And there are a few things here, like I think Rosana mentioned, which is the start date of the program selected. We have to see that the start date is available. And this is going to help us a lot. So we can automatically see when does the client want to travel. And with that information, we can see, number one, the priority that we're going to give this client, and also if it is a high priority to introduce the famous urgency creators. So we have a client that comes and says, I would like to travel in the next 3 weeks, 4 weeks or 3 months. This is going to be one of my priorities. Why? Because it's very near the starting date. We have to carry out all of the visa applications, etc. And also because I could generate, and I'm talking in commercial terms, not none other, but we can introduce different urgency creators. For example, we're not going to have time for our visas. And there are many of these. We would have one whole class, a master class on how to create urgency, but there are many things to be done. But always keep in mind that this is a priority client for you. Then you have to be enthusiastic, not only yourself, but all of the team. So the team can identify what is a priority and what is not a priority. If the client says that they want to travel in 2 years' time, then of course, that's not a priority. We have time to be calm and make the arrangements. Now, the starting date also has to do with promotions or low seasons. Anything that has to do with prices will affect the starting date. I'm not saying that in every case, but keeping to consideration that if you think, oh, in April we have an intake, if you want to go now, we're quite tight time-wise, but it can be done. Also, when a starting date is selected, you must consider the weather, the climate of the destination city, because we have many clients that cannot handle cold weather, others that hate the heat, others that like certain activities like skiing or open air football. We must consider these things because maybe you can ask, okay, when do you want to travel? December, great. If you go to Toronto, you're going to have a fantastic weather for skiing. You like snowboarding, so that will really suit you. Amazing. Let's look for things so that the client can say, yes, 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 I like it, I like it, I like it, and we can start to ground this client. And also the starting date allows us to see whether this is a good time for traveling. And we can say, yeah, okay, you want to go in September, that's fine. Canada is low season in September, so take advantage of this, because if you get the grades that you got, you are going to benefit. So the moment that the client has made a decision, we take note and consider it. Very well. Question number 4, languages. Do you speak any other languages? What is your foreign language level? Do you have some tests or certificates that can prove this? And this is important because if this student speaks a second language, we know that we can send that student to a, for example, higher education program, to a different pathway. But if the client has very low language skills, we have to talk about a combined program or a strictly English program. Always ask about certificates and tests. Why? Because by doing so, we avoid testing and other issues. Just with one question, we have a requirement that we have taken care of. So do you speak another second language? Yes. What? English. What level? I am a B2. How do you know? From a certificate from such and such an institution. And so sometimes, though, we do need to do a language test. And I know that you're going to be, all of you, agreeing with your heads, nodding with your heads. And in Latin America, I don't know what's going on, but everyone has intermediate English. If you ask about language, what is your language level? Oh, they say English intermediate. And then we are surprised that from 1 to 10, the client had an English level of 1.5. But we must take this question into consideration to start selecting what kind of program is this client better suited to. Why? Because also our available courses are based on language. If, for example, they want to study in Canada, it could be in English or in French, depending on the institution. But we can also make suggestions, and I think this is highly valued by clients. I don't know if you also agree, which is that they're always making suggestions, asking for advice, etc. And you are the expert, so people will value that advice. Don't worry about providing that advice because it's important to do so. So here we can say, okay, if you have a low English skill, start with this pathway, then you change to this program, etc., etc. But then sometimes we also need to ground the student. And I'm sure you will be nodding as well, because we may get the typical student. This doesn't happen often, but it does often. This is a student who say, I want to go and work in France. I do not speak any French. I do not speak any English, but I want to go and live and work in France. So sometimes the advice has to do with grounding our clients and say, okay, fine, you want to go to France. Excellent. How are you going to communicate? What are you going to do? How is it going to work? This may sound very obvious, like silly mistakes or silly examples, but it is very important to provide this advice. Another example has to do with the courses that people request. So sometimes they come and say, I want to study agriculture of X type of soil. I'm just making something up. But I want to study this in Canada. Okay, do you speak English? No, I want to do this course in Spanish. Well, no. If you want to go to Canada, the idea is to improve your language skills, to improve your English, etc., etc. So we need to ground them so they can have an idea of what they can do or not with their current language skills. But always, always we must check the requirements with the school. Why? Because sometimes we want to make progress with the student precisely to get the perfect program, the perfect destination, and we forget the requirements. And sometimes there is a requirement that our client is not compliant with. So we have to be very careful, because when we have everything put together and then all of the scaffolding is in place, and then we forgot to change the requirements, and there's a requirement that we are not complying with, then that's it. All of the work has been done for nothing. Now let's go to question 5. Education. What type of course do you want? What is your educational background? Do you have a hobby or activity that you're interested with? When we're talking about education, it is how. How are you going to study abroad? What are you going to do? So it is important to identify the area or course, but also that it coincides or matches the destination, the length, the school, etc. As we were saying, if a client comes and says, I want to study business, I have to make sure that the school that I am sending him to or her to will coincide with his educational aim. But we must also know their academic background. So let's say if a client has studied business management and they want a business postgraduate program, then that works very well with their background, even to obtain the visa. And this goes hand in hand with the third point, which is agreement of what is required and backgrounds. Or if I want to study hospitality, I need to prove why I want to study hospitality, what if I comply with the requirements so that I can get the visa. So this is your very important advice. You have to tell your client, well, if you studied tourism, you should be doing this program. If you studied business, you should be following this other program. Why? Because you're going to request a visa, there are available destinations, this is what you have studied, etc., etc. So yes, we're always grounding the student, because a lot of the time we do get unrealistic requests that cannot be achieved for something that may seem really obvious to us, but not to them. Now, another interesting question is to know if they have any hobbies or interests, because a lot of the time that could be a determining factor. For example, I've had clients who say, for me, it's really important to be able to ski. They knew when they wanted to go, what they were looking for as a location, and then I would focus on ski centers in that place. And automatically, the client would say, I love this destination, I love this idea, let's look for schools, let's look for courses, and then it became very simple. And finally, we always go back to the same, verify the admission requirements before you start putting quotes together, because sometimes we haven't checked this, we have carried out all of our advice, and then we have to backpedal because we did not check something. Number 6, objectives. What is the objective of this experience? What do you want to achieve with this trip? Do you want to travel on your own or with your family? Do you want to work, live, or emigrate? These are questions that are part of the advice that you provide your client. So the objective, first of all, has to be doable according to the programs I offer. For example, I did not provide any advice on working holiday visa in some countries. I know that it exists in Australia, New Zealand, etc. But sometimes they would come and say, oh, I want to go and work and I need a working holiday visa. For me, for my company, that would automatically be discarded because it did not coincide with what was required. Another question is that the objective is achievable. We can have a student that says, I want to do quantum physics postgraduate in China. Do you speak Chinese? No. Did you study physics? No. Business? Well, then we have to ground them again. I know that this sounds very repetitive, but I have encountered this situation many times, so I do want to highlight it so that we can immediately know whether we can spend time advising a client that when we know that it is not feasible at all, because the client's time is valuable and so is ours. So we are taking time away from another student that does agree with our type of advice. Something else that's important is according to the type of agency, the travel type is very important. If it's an individual visa or travel, then this is going to be easier than traveling as a couple or traveling with friends or family. We have to look for suitable programs. And all of this leads us to the bottleneck that I was discussing. Then also the final achievement, if you wanted a short trip, a mid-duration trip, a long duration trip, this has to be included in the objectives or in the final goal. And sometimes the goal combination has a lot to do, because you can have a student that says, yes, I want to go, I want to study, but then I would like to emigrate and work and stay there. Okay, excellent. We're going to offer a higher education course where you can study. Okay, what did you study? Great. We're going to find something that is linked to what you are looking for and what you study. This is going to help you with your visa, but then afterwards you can have a post-graduation work permit and you will be able to emigrate. You can stay there. I'm just giving you odd examples. Each one of you will adapt them according to your own agency, but don't forget to ask this because this is very important. So to summarize, as I said, this is just a guideline. These are the 6 questions that I consider basic to understand the needs of the client 100%. We have to see again, where is the location, for how long, starting when, how or which language, how is your education background, and why are the objectives. These are the 6 basic questions that I think everybody should ask a variation of this. And now I would like to say something. When you are training your team, whether you have 1 counselor or 25 counselors, it is very important to have established procedures. And that is why it's important to understand also that the questions are not random questions, but that they have an objective, which is to lead our advisors to be the best possible counselors that they can be, so that they can ask the right questions and understand exactly the needs of our clients. There is nothing more valuable in this work than empathy, being empathic with the clients. This has helped us change and influence many lives, and I hope you can do so as well. Now, to add to these 6 questions, and I'm not saying that they are not as important, I would say all 12 questions are as important, but when we are training a team, it is difficult to just ask 12 questions and train them to do it properly. If I give them 12 questions, maybe they will not have all of the knowledge or training. So it's better to just stage it and divide it to see if they want to apply the second level questions. These are not less important. There are many of these that I consider basic, and you will see it in Pablito's strategy that you're going to see next, which is the strategy that I put together, and I named it like that just for you to remember it. So the complementary questions. Number one, the nationality of the client, because this is very important. We know that there are some nationalities that are difficult for visa application. Sometimes the destination is closed. Sometimes some destinations have zones that are risk areas, risk nationalities, sorry, nationalities that are not broadly accepted, others that are doing really well. And here there's something that I have found very useful. I always ask for the nationality because particularly in Latin America, we have many students with double nationality. And to apply with a passport from another country, the most suitable passport, that will help us regarding approval of visas or denial of visas. And also the issue of nationality has a lot to do with the prices that we're going to offer. If it is a Mexican, Colombian, Chilean, we have to, this is going to be very useful for us for the visa application. Now, the issue of age has also been very useful to me, and I'm being fully honest here. I did not work with people older than 35 years of age, and not because I didn't want to, but because the visa department, which is where I would take the cases, would almost always request many, many things for those older than 35. They were complicated. We would try to get the clients to understand why traveling with 35, 40, 50 years of age is not impossible, but it is harder than at 18 or 25. So all of these things are important. Don't forget that counseling, providing the counsel, giving advice is going to give us, it's going to be a reference for us. Maybe the client will say, great, thank you for your advice. I see that it's too complicated. I don't have these requirements, but I value your advice. I value your counsel. And this is going to bring sometimes clients because they can go and speak to another person and say, look, go to this agency because they're very clear and very sincere and they will not waste your time. Then another thing that I always ask is, how did you hear about us? For me, this is very important to generate trust. And you know that generating trust with clients is fundamental. So if the client was referred by someone who had spoken about me, I knew already that I had that client's trust at that stage and I could move forward with other things. But this also helps us as agency, as company, to identify how we're working. Sometimes, yes, we have a lot of students that are joining us because they have found us through social media. And yes, I think Instagram, Facebook are very good. And with an Instagram that can identify us specifically better, different platforms. If we did through a workshop or a campaign, sales, identifying how the client found us is very important to see where we are going to concentrate our marketing efforts. Now, the contact, simple and silly question, but sometimes we forget. The client came and left an email. We didn't ask for his WhatsApp, for his number. If there is a student portal, they can also do it through a student portal like my platform, the one that I represent. Having a visible and fluid communication channel with the client is very important to drive the sales as quickly as possible. Another question, visas. Do you have visas? Have you ever been denied a visa? If I can see that this client has had 3 denials, then I see that it's very difficult that this client is going to have a visa approval. Maybe it will get approval, but this is something that we need to know. This is a client that has traveled all over the world, has had loads of approved visas. Then I think there is a greater chance for this client. And then finally, and not less important, and this is something that I almost always ask, budget. Yes, This is not an easy question. It's a difficult question because depending on how we ask it, it could sound good or not. But we need to have an idea of numbers, of budget according to their experience. Because this is what we're saying. The client can say, I want to go and study abroad for 2 years and I have $1,500. Then we will say, okay, look, you can't do this. The cost is this. And sometimes the budget, and I'm talking here commercially, asking, for example, through your website, I have from 0 to 2,000, from 2,000 to $5,000 available. This gives us an idea of whether we are dealing with a true potential client or someone who just wants information because they want information and can be just taking up our time. So we are closing with the 6 complementary questions, which, as I said, you can apply to your agency as and when you want. And then we get to the Pablito strategy. That's the name to help you remember it. So how did I work? Asking questions in this order. Where, how long, when, which, how, and why. These are the 5 basic questions. And then number 6, budget. Number 7, visas. And then I would ask another question, grouping another, suite of issues like the age, etc. But I did it like this: where, how long, when, which, how, why, budget, visas, others. This is an example. You sit with your team, see what works better in your case. I always left the most positive questions at the beginning and at the end, the sandwich method, and the uncomfortable ones like budget I would put in the middle so that it wasn't so harsh on the student. Then we would talk in others about hobbies, interests, weather, things they like doing, things that are lighter than talking about funds. Very well, something else, and this is homework. You can identify your type of client so that your team can dedicate their time to potential students and take time away from those who are not potential students. And here we have 3 different clients with different characteristics and our evaluation and the opportunity that we really have with that client. This is just an example. Client A, low budget, close destination, impossible objective, with a far off start time, let's say in 2 years' time. For me, this is the least desirable client, and the opportunity I had with this client was very limited. I wanted to focus on the other 2. Those that have a relative urgency, some of short duration but easy to carry out. Some may have had rejected or denied visas and it was more complicated, not the suitable age. Maybe they were 45, 50 years old, which is not impossible, it's not wrong. But we know in some cases, at least my visa department back then was saying, careful. And then the issue of a language level. Sometimes they didn't speak the language, but they didn't want to carry out an English course. This is a manageable client that we can modify their objectives based on their needs, based on the counseling. But we have a medium opportunity. It can work out very well or very badly. And then we have client C, our best client, a very urgent case, solid budget, clear and doable objectives, and referred. That is the ideal client with a high opportunity. And this works because we can say, look, the moment that you find this ideal client, we have to focus our work on this client. I'm going to move faster. I'm not going to include this because we have time constraints. Organization and strategy is very important to have an organization, but to have a strategy to carry out this counseling. I know that I'm really short of time. If you want to take a picture of the screen or write it down, take this into consideration because it's important to have tools, to have a suitable offer, to have marketing tools to be effective, to have everything automated with reminders and follow-up. This is important for a basic organization. In terms of strategy, we need to have our counseling with a basic guide of questions. and we need to close those that are not priorities. We need to have sales closures techniques. We need to have a good school such as SET, where they know that they are going to provide solid counseling and good experience. This has a lot to do with the loyalty of the clients and the post-sales advice. Typical customer journey. This is what any company would do with any type of client, service, or product. I'm going to show you and share with you the customer journey that I found very useful. And I know that we have, very limited time. Apologies. So the customer journey, 6 basic steps. And this doesn't mean that they're the necessary steps. I had 12 steps, but this is like the ABC of how to do it. So when we get to lead, ask the basic and complementary questions, going in greater depth, adjusting objectives and variables. Again, to send a quote to see if there is an available budget, applications, visas, flights, etc. A lot of follow-up before, during, and after the trip. And then we have the post-sales work, which is renewals, surveys, etc. And I would just like to thank you very much again, NCT, for giving me the opportunity to address you. If you have any doubts or queries, this is the time to ask questions. If you want to keep in touch to learn more about the advisor, you can email me to pabloq@advisor.io. I'm also in LinkedIn, and it will be my pleasure to advise you. Thank you. Thank you very much, Pablo. Excellent content. When I was listening to you, I was thinking of two profiles in my head, and I think all of us here have tackled two different profiles of students. The first one is that student who only knows they want to study abroad, they want to study in Canada, and that's it. Then we have the other student who knows in what airline he wants to fly, where he wants to live, what he wants to study, and what he's going to wear on the first day. Everything is so well defined that sometimes it's complicated to counsel them in the best possible way. I think Pablito's strategy really adjusts well to both profiles, because you said something very important, which is that we are the experts. We know and we have advised or counseled so many people that we know how to tackle this issue. Or, for example, the student wants to study quantum physics in China without speaking Chinese or having ever learned physics. So this helps us to identify and advise them, counsel them in the best possible way. Absolutely, that is extremely important, and thank you for mentioning it, because sometimes with that profile, when they're very focused on an idea, we need to say, okay, why something else would be more viable or would be also useful or should also be considered elsewhere, another course, etc. Yes. Here, Pablo, we have a question that said, what do you recommend to do? What do you recommend when you have a student that is not too close to the type of priority that the agency normally has? How can we tackle them? I think your Pablito's strategy is very clear, but the question is, how would you handle that student, that case? Well, first of all, there is nothing worse than an agency that is not going to give advice to all of the clients, be this whatever client, because otherwise it speaks very badly of us. We have to give and provide counsel and advice as we would to a friend or a family member, even if the counseling that we're providing is not positive. But we still have to provide it. We can say, look, analyzing your profile, unfortunately, it does not match with the programs that we're offering. Let's say that this person is looking for a working holiday. Look, I recommend that you check these websites, these different agencies, always with very good energy, with a very positive spin, thanking them for contacting you, but also trying to give some recommendation if we can. If we don't have one, well, that's not a problem. but always give an answer. Never ignore a client, because people discuss this. And then Pablito's agency doesn't answer. I have sent 5 emails and they're not answering. Maybe you did identify that I wasn't your potential client, but still you have to answer. Yes, I think it's correct. You must always have a call to action, even if it's a very highly decided student or someone who still has no idea what they want to do. We, as experts, need to always give them the feedback. We have another question here, Pablo. What would you say is the best way of lowering the expectations of a student, or to ground or land a student to the reality? So for example, let's say we have the student who wants to study farming, agriculture in Germany. How do you help them? Okay, let's use that example. And once again, let's go back to the same. Always politely, but truthfully. The first thing I would say is, great, you want to go to Germany to learn agriculture. Do you speak German? No, not at all. Okay. Another example, if we get someone from Nigeria to Argentina and they want to study, the first thing they're going to need is to speak Spanish for their life, for their daily activities, and to study, of course. You are going to need exactly the same thing to go to Germany. You're going to need at least English, at the very least English, if this is an English program. Now, the other question is, why do you want to study agriculture? Oh, because you studied it here, so you want to go into graduate school. Great, excellent. But keep in mind that if you're going to do that, the costs are going to be between this and that. Why? Because then I would know if the student is looking for scholarships or for something specific. So do you have any idea of costs? Yes, it's between this and that. Now, the client may say, oh, these costs are not in agreement with my budget. And say, don't worry, we have other programs of other areas. Look, I'll give you an example. Sometimes they came to study physics. They wanted to study physics, but then they ended up doing tourism. And this may be better. They would obtain more work, they had better job opportunities, study opportunities, they were complying with all of the admission requirements. So I think politely and truthfully, we can lead the student to our options, to what we have available that is viable to them. So what I don't want to say is, we cannot sell smoke and mirrors if we cannot offer something, but let's try to take them to something that could be feasible and explain why we're suggesting that, what are the benefits of doing it in such a destination with such a program. Thank you. Pablo, we have 3 more very interesting questions here in the chat, but unfortunately we've run out of time. Just to wrap up this session, remind us, please, the 6 questions. Location, duration, start date, language, education objectives. And I think with this, we can close today's session that had very important and useful content. And I think we could continue the rest of the day with these questions, because this is our industry and our daily lives. But due to time constraints, we have to finish now. Pablo, thank you very much for such excellent content. This is going to help me identify my questions when I talk to these different profiles of students.